America is poised to attack. Are we going after the correct targets? Why haven't we actually declared war or declared war earlier? When you consider what we're up against and what's happened, it's amazing that it's been swept under the rug for so long. What am I talking about? Well, let's go back and look at what got American war. How many casualties compared to what I'm about to talk about? How many casualties have brought us into wars? You take World War One. We went and sent massive amounts of troops to Europe. What over? The sinking the Lusitania. Yes, the German U-boat sunk the Lusitania, a German U-boat, in May the 7th of 1915. How many Americans did we lose? 128. For the loss of 128 lives, America, the United States, declared war and joined World War One. 128 Americans. So that's kind of thresholds we're talking about. What about, and it wasn't even an American-owned ship, you see. The Lusitania was owned by the Cunard Line, a British shipping company, not even an American ship. There was more British people lost in that, but there were 1,959 people on board. 1,198 passed away. But of those, only 128 Americans passed away. There were 11 Americans that actually survived. All that said, as we know, World War II was instigated when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor on the 7th of December, 1941. How many Americans did we lose then? 2,403. I'm going somewhere with this because these numbers sound terrible, but compared to what we've been enduring otherwise, they're actually very low, very low. So think about that. There was actually in the attack on Pearl Harbor another 1,178 wounded Americans. Of course, we lost some ships too. But on September 11th, 2001, 2,977 people lost their lives. So actually, a fair number of those weren't American, but that just gives you an idea. At the World Trade Center, there were 2,753 people that lost their lives. In the Pentagon, 184. And in Flight 93, which crashed in Pennsylvania, there were 40. So, you think about that. Think about that. Now, the when you put that in comparison, now what about Gulf? What about the Vietnam War? What got us into that? It was the sinking of a ship in an incident called the Gulf of Tonkin. You've probably heard of that. The ship was USS destroyer Maddox. We lost one sailor. One sailor. We went to a war and lost 54,000 Americans in that war that ensued, and we fought for 11 years. Although there were 6 sailors wounded, we lost one. Now there was some oddball things about that because there was claims of a second attack, which now we know didn't really happen. There was what you call a banner not so true. Another way to talk about a flag that's not too true. I got to be careful what I say on here. But all these things aside, we've had something far worse happen to us because we got to ask how many of them have passed away from synthetic opioids, or there's one in particular, which I guess I can't mention the name on here these days. And I might have to get you channel in trouble apparently, but let's say the word ends with anol and starts with fent. So just for purposes of brevity, we're going to code name it F-ball. Just for the purposes of trying to not get shut down here. Anyway, in 2023, 105,000 Americans lost their lives due to overdose from this, what we're going to call F-ball. Can you believe that? 105,000 in total. Up to that point, we lost something like 250,000 American lives due to this mess. 250,000. That's like 104 times more people than passed away in Pearl Harbor. And yet, we just sweep it under the rug. We just sweep it under the rug. And F-ball accounts for about 69% of OD, overdose fatalities. It is the leading cause of drug poisoning deaths, as we shall say, overdoses, to be more explicit. So think about that. So in the years 2022 to 23, there were 70, in those years, up to 2023, 73,000 Americans lost their lives. So, like I said, a total of 250,000 Americans. So when you take all that into account, there were also children that probably were targeted because they came out with this candy colored version called Rainbow F-ball. Most of that, we know some of that was intercepted. Hopefully none of that made it into the market. But there have been kids, we don't know the numbers, there have been kids that just saw this stuff and took it, got exposed to it, and accidentally passed away. So there are innocents that pass away over it. We do lose innocent people. And we've lost people that really didn't mean to pass away. Some people, I think they're taking one thing, and the cartels and the dealers, they cut this stuff into other substances to make them more potent, which causes more overdoses. I had a guy work for me, for example. This guy, I thought he was one of the dumbest human beings I ever saw. Well, he was on drugs. I thought he was just dumber than dirt. Well, he decided to go straight. I fired him. And, well, he come back to me one day, and this guy, I thought he was just couldn't put two words together, almost that dumb. He came back to me one day, and he was telling me he had gone straight. He had gone sober, got out of this stuff. He didn't want it anymore. His life was so much better. And this guy actually talked like he had two brain cells or more, or before he didn't sound like, he talked like he had full brain. He made a lot of sense. He was sharp, articulate, had goals. I was proud of him. His mom died. And in a moment of weakness, he took another hit. And he's pushing daisies now. That was a shame, real shame. I mean, some people still got some weaknesses, and, in a moment of despair, he gave in to it and it got him. There's a lot of stories like that. That's not the only one. Many, many stories of people that passed. You know anybody that passed? If you don't, put a one in the notes below. If you do, put a two. I like to see. I can't imagine anybody out here don't know somebody that hasn't kicked a bucket over this stuff, because it's taken so many people. It is horrible, just horrible. But there's other crimes. See, it's not just the people we've lost. There's other crimes associated with these drugs, violent crimes, in fact. A lot of the cases where people get offed by cartel activities are pretty high. They believe that at least 5% of the murders in the United States are drug related, at least 5%. But they did some case studies. Now, that's probably low, because they did a case study in New York City in 1981 and found that 42% of the homicides during a 9-month period they studied this were directly tied to drug trafficking. See where I'm going with this? There's other crime, property crime. There's the fact that a lot of these people are sick that take these drugs. It messes with them. They're not productive anymore. A lot of them can't hold jobs. They go on welfare. You pay for that. You pay for their medical costs. There's just a tons of cost associated with this stuff. So you got to bear all this stuff in mind. So, if just 5% of the homicides were drug related, and considering the U.S. has seen, like, annually something over 17 to 18,000 bang homicide incidents, I'd say 850 to 900 Americans are losing their lives due to that. And a lot of them may be people that work associated with it. You get these drive-by bang-bangs. And a lot of time, innocents are lost to that. How many innocents? I would say that over the duration of the last few years, since F-ball came to the market, that's up, and that the number is on par with things that have launched us into war. If you want to discount the people that are taking the stuff, and I don't think you really can, but you know, here there's some oddball things that come out in some of the studies I was running on this, and it suggested that in 2023 that opioids, which this F-ball is part of, cost our economy a total burden of $2.7 trillion. Let that sink in. That is huge. That's about 9.7% of our GDP. Almost 10% of what our country's worth. But what part of that cost is assailed as lives lost at 1.11 trillion. Reduced quality of life, at 1.34 trillion. And that's non-fatal incidents, of overdose. Yeah, it's not just people passing away. There's a lot of injuries associated with this stuff. So the healthcare cost is like $107 billion a year. Lost labor productivity, about $107 billion for that. Crime and law enforcement related losses is about $63 billion. See, these costs add up. And like I said, there's also the social welfare, health care, about 60.4 billion. Criminal justice, 10.9 billion. And if you bring in disability, workers' comp, paid them by employers, then that's about 26.5 billion. Social services, child and family assistance, about $7.8 billion. So, see, guys, this stuff racks up. It really racks up. So, these costs rack up to like, being greater than what we put in our military, at about $1 trillion a year. So it's like, if your entire military gets wiped out, well, this is bigger. So this is comparable, far worse than an attack on a military base, a naval base like Pearl Harbor. That's bad. Don't get me wrong. That was horrendous. But what I'm saying is what's happening here in the United States alone is off the charts bad. And it's not just bad for the United States. It's bad for the countries from which this comes. You look at Venezuela, which mainly deals with the Coke side of it. I'm not going to say the whole word. Coke sounds like a drink, but you know what I'm talking about. Rhymes with propane. That stuff, guys, takes a lot of people too, and it's huge in the drug trade, and that's the main commodity that Venezuela and their cartels are marketed in and pushing. They're bringing it up through Colombia. Guess what? That stuff, the whole crashing of the economy of Venezuela, a third of the people have left Venezuela over that. A third of the people. The economy has crashed. Although Maduro lives in a big mansion, got a lot of horses, and lives in luxury, supposedly a communist, living like a rich man. Go figure that. Anyway, we're going to get into that later. I'm not going to go into that right now, but so the bottom line is that social services at least 2.3 billion, social to the government, state and local, to insurers and employers about 5.7 billion. So if you total all this stuff up, government, federal, state, and local, about 82.6 billion a year. Well, that's just part of the total. The grand total, the cost, not Clinton loss of life, that big, 1.1 trillion, is something like 202 billion, 202.3 billion. So that's the total opioid cost in 2023. It's huge. There's nothing good to come out of this. So, if you look at the problem I have with this is we are on the verge of perhaps attacking Venezuela. We're on the verge of it maybe going after the cartels in Mexico. And I don't have any qualms with that, given what's happened. But who's really the source of this stuff? Most of the F-ball, at least. The raw materials, the country that actually sent F-ball in the United States directly Then when protests, well, they started just sending the constituent materials for it. Now that the cartels finished the manufacturing process, but the constituents still came from the same country whose banks laundered the money for the cartels, and that country is China. China. Yet we're playing softball with China. This is why I have said to you guys that China is already at war with us, and we're just too stupid, too dumb to know it. We need to play hardball back. I'm not saying we should declare war on China, but we definitely ought to raise the ante many times beyond what our current president's talking about. He's playing softball with them, and we need to get lots harder. This is horrendous what's happening in this nation, and they're behind a lot of it. They're also very connected with these cartels here in the United States of America. So, just kind of looking at the supply chain. Primary supply chains come from Mexico, and the most illicit F-ball, as I said, in the U.S. is manufactured in Mexico by drug cartels such as the Sinaloa and the CJNG, Jalisco, I don't know how you say that in Spanish, New Generation Cartels, what that CJNG stands for. They pronounce J as a H, Jalisco. I don't know if I get that right. But anyway, guys, so these cartels press fentanyl into counterfeit pills, into oxycodone, Xanax, and Adderall. You see, guys, this is where people, they think they're taking one thing and they're getting something else. And again, China, historically the main source of finished F-ball, shipped directly to the United States via mail or even express consignment. They started then really running it through the cartels, but they were sending some straight here to the United States. And then they started running through the cartels. And then they had some regulations they come up with in 2019. So they were going to be nice people. So they just decided to supply the precursor chemicals like NPP and 4-ANPP. How does that make them any more innocent? It's just like changing the topic. It's like, shifting things a little bit, but they're still behind it. You see what I'm saying? It's okay. They're not sending the F-ball over anymore. Yeah, right. Right. Well, the precursors are mainly shipped to Mexico where the cartels complete the synthesis, mainly there. But India also has a big role to play in some of the opioids that's come to this country. But the F-ball is mainly coming to the United States through Mexico via China. So how is it that China gets off the hook? As again, we're looking at going into Venezuela, and their main thing is coke with rhymes with propane, transit gateway. So that's mainly what they're involved in. I'm going to go more into this because I'm going to talk about Venezuela and a subsequent, and probably the next video or two, because we're on the verge of hitting them. By the time I get around to reporting it, it might be that the action's already underway. We've got we got several ships. I think 4 ships and a submarine, nuke submarine, down there with 4,000 Marines on them. I think 40,500 troops total. And, we know that Maduro he's amassed 4.5 million conscripts or supposedly volunteers for militias. Guys, they're not a match. They're not a match for what we're sending down. They're just cannon fodder from Maduro. And that's another shame. You give people sticks and put them up against the United States military. Maybe a few of them are rusty to have lucky to have a few rusty AKs. You see what I'm saying, guys? I don't blame Trump for going into that, but we're giving China too much of a free pass. That's my whole point with this thing. And so when I go through all these numbers, the people we've lost to this stuff and what's launched us into wars so many times before, I mean, big major wars. This is far bigger. This is far bigger hit on America than what's launched us into war after war. We're not in a pretty place. Something's got to be done. This has got to stop, but it don't come without expense. And talking about expense, we know that China has basically declared an economic war on the United States too, where their BRICS are trying to take down our dollar. So to preserve your own wealth, I highly encourage you maybe consider gold backs. You can get those and gold bars, coins, rounds, silver and platinum. Also, if you go to defythegrid.com and you get 1% off if you use coupon code Green Gregs. And I am Greg Allison here with the Green Gregs channel. If you like this content, please subscribe, bang the bell, and click all. Who else comes in here and breaks it out as I just broke it out? I'm giving you the skinny of what's launched us into war after war after war, and how, in my humble opinion, that pales compared to what we're dealing with now. So, yeah, I can see going after some of the foot soldiers that's in Venezuela and Mexico, but the generals, the financiers, they're over in China. So something needs to be done. It's time to play some serious hardball. And, that we're letting 600,000 Chinese students in the United States, if you take their 2017 National Intelligence Law, Article 7, it, as I explained in the video I did last night, it says that they have to comply with any request for the intelligence agencies from China. It's a law. The citizens of China all have to do this to obtain information from the United States, basically spy on us. So we're bringing an army of spies over here and putting them in our universities where we do our most valuable research. And we're just allowing all that kind of stuff. I'm not happy with any of that. And I think that the tariffs on China should be sky high. They're not high enough. So, not to mention we're actually putting revenue in our treasury with the tariffs now, and inflation really hasn't kicked up that much yet, as a lot of people feared. So it's a net positive. These tariffs have been a net positive on the purses of America. It's how America financed its government prior to the creation of a certain bank, it's central in 1913, if you know what I'm talking about. Same year they passed income taxes so they could pull all kind of stuff on us. My friends, the proposition of my channel is help you survive, thrive, and stay on the high. And I always tell you, keep your eyes wide open, head on the swivel, because it's coming at us from every direction right now. And there ain't nobody else coming to save you except yourself, your friends, your family, whatever mag groups you may build, mutual assistance, mutual assured assistance groups, survival tribes, as I like to call them. But you got to be careful in forming those because it's like getting married. Well, my friends, seriously, if you're not prepping, what are you doing? We're on the verge of war with maybe even Russia. I hope not, but we might get drug in that. This Iran thing's about to flare up again. We got North Korea. We got China with the Philippines, China with Taiwan. It's just all over, guys. India and Pakistan may get into war. Hopefully that won't involve us directly, but the effects of that war would definitely impact us economically and perhaps environmentally too. So we're not out of the woods by any stretch of the imagination. Then we got to worry about our power grid from many sources that don't like us being king of the hill. And one way to stop that is to take down our grid. So this is why I tell you guys to get ready, to prepare. So I can say I call all my followers swivel heads. Alrighty, enough said. I have just brought it to you. I hope you understand this. If you like the content, again, subscribe, bang the bell, and click all. And with that, I'm going to say thank you all for watching. Greg out.